Welcome to more Cheap Heat. This is sort of the famous musicians edition of Cheap Heat. I'm going over some deliberately less obscure records, things that you should definitely be able to find in your brick and mortar record store or easily online. Let's get to it. What we're listening to now is a record by a guy named Georg Deuter, who later became associated with the New Age music movement. But his first two records, the first one's called D, and it's a krautrock classic. You got to hear it. It's a little pricey though, but it's definitely out there. You can find it. I think it's been reissued as well. This is his second album called Aum, you know, the Om thing. So sort of a Indian religious thing going on here. Some would call this New Age. To me, it's almost sort of in the sort of mellow krautrock vein. More guitar oriented, obviously, because Deuter was a guitarist first and foremost. But this is a really great record, and it was reissued in several different formats, domestically as well as import. This is, I think, an early reissue on the Kuckuck label, but it's a fantastic record. You can listen to it in the background. And Deuter is a really interesting character. Later moved to Oregon to be with the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And if you don't know who that is, you should look him up on Wikipedia. It's a fascinating story. So that's what we'll be listening to during this video. I hope I get through all these records. Okay, I said this is going to be about famous musicians and about well-known groups. Some of these groups have just sort of faded into obscurity just because, I don't know, who knows why things fade into obscurity. Anyway, the Nice, Ars Longa Vita Brevis. This is probably the first progressive rock album I ever heard. My brother brought this home. I don't think he liked it very much. My brother tends to be more of a rock and roller, but I think he brought this home and I just fell in love with it. And it's a great record. And it's Keith Emerson's band before Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It's also Brian Davidson and Lee Jackson's band before Refugee with Patrick Moraz. But this is a great record. This is my favorite Nice record. They did a bunch of records, and they were pretty popular at the time. But this has got a really fantastic version of America from West Side Story, written by Leonard Bernstein. And I just love this record. It's really held up. It's a little dated, but it's held up. Another guy who's pretty famous that a lot of you might have heard of, maybe not, is Arthur Brown. And he had a band called The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. And their first album is called The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. It's got a hit on it called Fire. My wife loves that song, so this gets a lot of play around the house. And it never ceases to amaze me how well this has held up over the years. It's a really good record. Pretty much the backing band became another band called Atomic Rooster, and they did a lot of really cool stuff. Some of it is cheap. The U.S. domestic releases can be found for under $10 probably. But this record cooks all the way through, and it's got some really crazy, wild moments, and Arthur Brown is very entertaining. I like it a lot. I don't know about you, when I was a kid, they had the local cool radio station where the DJ would talk like this. That was the Grateful Dead playing 30 minutes of jamming. And they would just talk like that, and sometimes they were too cool to tell you what the track was or who the artists were. And I had a devil of a time figuring out some of this stuff. And they played this one song a few times and they never announced the band. It would drive me crazy. Anyway, it took me a few years, but I figured out it was by this band called Flash. And it turned out that Flash was the band formed by Peter Banks, the guitar player, after he left his original band. Yes, yeah, he was the original guitarist in Yes before Steve Howe. And they did a bunch of albums. The first two, this is called Flash, and this is called Flash in the Can. Both of these records are great, and they've got kind of a very distinctive sounding vocalist, but he's actually quite good. Great drummer, Mike Huff. Great bass player, Ray Cooper, who also played keyboards. And Peter Banks also, I think, doubled on keyboards. But these are great records, really long tracks, really great guitar solos. And of course, these covers are titillating, to say the least. I really like these records a lot. If you see them, get them. The first two are completely wonderful. Here's an album that gets passed over a lot, mostly because the cover doesn't look like a prog rock record, does it? It's got sort of a greaser dude on the front and a bar scene and a naked woman sitting on the bar, and it's got some more greaser dudes on the back. It's called Greasy Truckers Live at Dingwall's Dance Hall. Doesn't look like a progressive rock classic, does it? But it is. And this has gone up recently. I'm talking about it anyway because it's so good. But it's a double live record, different band on each side. Side one is Camel. This is from 1973, by the way, that magical year of music. Side one is Camel. Side two, Henry Cow. Side three, the Global Village Trucking Company, which was sort of a rustic prog rock outfit, kind of like Man. Remember them? The Welsh band? They were kind of like that. Not killer, but good. And Jimmy Lascelles plays keyboards on that. He pops up in a bunch of interesting bands later on. And side four is Gong, circa You and Angel's Egg. So this is a great record, a great live record, and it might set you back $20 now or 15, but it's definitely worth seeking out. And you just don't expect from the appearance, you don't expect it to be, Henry Cow and Gong and Camel. Anyway, Global Village Trucking Company also is on it, and it's Greasy Truckers Live at Dingwall's Dance Hall. I can't remember what label it's on. It's on some small label. Speaking of Gong, their wonderful guitarist, Steve Hillage, did a bunch of solo records. Some of them got issued in the US, Motivation Radio and L. And Fish Rising, which is not cheap anymore. I love Fish Rising. Huge favorite of mine. Sounds just like a Gong record, except really jamming. Not knocking Gong at all. I love Gong. Then Al and Motivation Radio. I thought they were okay. I thought they were decent, but I've never hung on to them. His later stuff never got issued in the US, but it's actually killing. And the double live one called Live Herald, gotta get this record. And it's hard for me to believe how cheap this is. And the follow-up to that is called Green. It's on green vinyl, which was really unusual back then. These records are from the late 70s. And both of them are great all the way through. Great band. Joe Blocker on drums, Curtis Robinson Jr. on bass guitar. Niket Garati, I think she was Mrs. Hillage, on keyboards and vocals. These records are so good, and the tunes are so good. I love these records. Really fantastic. The double live one can't miss, and Green is thoroughly great. There's a follow-up called Open, which is decent. Also worth seeking out, also very cheap. But Steve Hillage did so much good stuff. And if you like electronic music, his later stuff's even better. I'm not crazy about that style, though. All right, so I'm going to try to talk briefly about some of my favorite musicians who's done a lot of records that are cheap heaters. The first guy is David Sanchez, and he first came to prominence in Bruce Springsteen's band, believe it or not. And David Sanchez, as a musical prodigy, an amazing guitar player, amazing keyboardist, and an amazing vocalist. This guy can do it all. He's still around, he's still out there, just tremendous. And I've got a whole bunch of his records. All of them are cheap. This is his first one. It's simply called David Sanchez, and it's on sort of an Exploito label, the Chelsea record label. And it's the kind of record that makes you wonder if you ever saw any money out of this. And about half of this is instrumental, funky jazz rock, and about half of it is vocal, sort of progressive tinged rock. And it's really good. No credits on it, so I don't know who the band is, but I'm guessing David Sanchez is the keyboard player and the guitarist on this. All original tracks, I believe, except he does a version of Dixie that's pretty out there, pretty cool. So, after his success with Bruce Springsteen, he was signed by Columbia to an exclusive contract and did a record called Forest of Feelings, produced by Billy Cobham. This is with Gerald Carboy on bass and Ernest Carter Jr. on drums, power trio, and mostly a keyboard record. There might be a little bit of guitar on this. I'm not sure. Yeah, he's credited with guitar on this, so there is some guitar on this, but it's really mostly a keyboard-oriented jazz rock record, and really excellent all the way through, all instrumental, unlike his first one. The follow-up is a total classic, Transformation, the Speed of Love. I mean, this is absolutely one of the greatest records ever recorded by anybody ever, I swear. Take it from me. Check it out on YouTube if you don't believe me. This is much more guitar-centric than Forest of Feelings, and it's incredible. It's so next level. I listen to this pretty regularly. And same band, Ernest Carter on drums, Gerald Carboy on bass, David Sanchez on keyboards and guitar. This is a must-have for anybody into progressive rock or fusion. He followed those up with these records on Arista. He recorded a third record for Columbia, actually. Never made it into the commercial marketplace. It's available as a bootleg CD. I don't endorse buying bootlegs, but whatever. Anyway, or maybe it was after he finished with Arista. I'm not sure, but anyway, he was between companies, and this record got rejected. Anyway, True Stories was the next one. It came out with a different cover in the US. This is the British version. This highly unlikely fusion of gospel music, I swear to God, and progressive rock. And it got me. This record's got me through some really tough times. I really love this record. It's got vocalists on, a lot of singing, but it's just beautiful. There's two wonderful there's a wonderful female vocalist on this, Brenda Madison, as well as Gail Boggs, two wonderful female vocalists, plus Alex Ligertwood, who later joined Santana, and he was also in Brian Auger's band. He was also with Andre Ceccarelli and those people in France. So he's done a lot of different stuff. But this is a great record, a lot of vocals, but it's still beautiful. And it's called True Stories, David Sanchez. Finally, he did this record, Just As I Thought, which is kind of a return to fusion. This has got Jeff Berlin on it, on bass, and T.M. Stevens and Ernest Carter. There are a couple of vocal tracks on this, but it's more of a jazz rock fusion record. One of my favorite records by him, too. Really cool. A lot of really memorable compositions. Excuse me. Another wonderful musician whose work I never seem to tire of for a couple of reasons is Bo Hanson, the late Bo Hanson. Really fantastic Swedish keyboard player. Did a bunch of really distinctive progressive rock, I would say jazzy progressive rock records in the 70s. Kept recording, I think, through the early 80s as well. Now, the interesting thing about him is all of his records, of course, came out in Sweden before they came out over here on the Silence label, I think, which is a really cool label. And they're not super expensive, but they're not cheap heaters by any stretch. But they're different. Same title, only in Swedish, but the different mix, different tracks, different sequence, different everything. So I have the Swedish ones in the stacks as well as these, and they're worth getting. But if you're on a budget, if you're on a tight budget, if you're in exploration mode, get these, the US pressings, and you won't be sorry. These will cost a pittance. Lord of the Rings, I think this is his second solo record. Might have been his first. It's all based on the book by J.R.R. Tolkien. All instrumental, though, and very interesting. Really kind of a progressive rock sound. Magician's Hat was his second one that I saw in the US. There's another one, though. I'm sure of it. That I'm missing. Well, anyway, this is the first one I ever bought. I got this when I was back in high school. And Magician's Hat is much more jazzy than Lord of the Rings. It's got saxophonists on it and stuff like that. And it kind of led me to discover more about the whole Euro progressive scene, because the guys he was on that were on this record, Rune Carlson and Rolf Scherer and Gunnar Bergsten and Stan Bergman and Bobo Stenson, were all active in the Swedish jazz scene. And of course, back in those days, there was import bins, and you could see these guys, their names in the credits. And I would pick up the albums, and by golly, you discover a whole new world of music. This is a tremendous record. I would say this is one of the most pivotal records in my collection, just as far as me discovering music. Bo Hanson, Magician's Hat. All on the famous Charisma label, which of course I loved because it was the label that Genesis was on. And I think this is from the late 70s, 1977. music inspired by Watership Down. Also excellent, still really inventive. Again, a little bit more of a progressive rock sound, less jazzy, but no less rewarding to listen to. And just a fantastic record. All those single-digit dollars. Another great band, an American band from Chicago, but they moved out to LA, was Shadowfax. They did this one record on Passport, and it's like a sort of a Mahavishnu Weather Report sort of sounding record, really outstanding. And then they sort of disappeared, and then they popped up again in the 80s on Windham Hill and recorded some more stuff. I got to see them live. They were actually quite good, well into the 80s. Really enjoyable stuff. Much more accessible than this. This is a stone cold progressive rock classic, and no holds barred, wailing progressive rock. Very intricate Mahavishnu inspired compositions. The guitar player G.E. Stinson is still active out in LA. He's an amazing player. Yeah, just a really cool record. And this could be had for next to nothing. This was reissued on Windham Hill too, actually, because they did have some success later on. But this is called Watercourse Way, and all instrumental fusion with prog, definite prog content there though. Another one of my favorite bands, Deep Purple, not exactly a progressive rock band, but progressive enough. All of them went off to do solo records or form other bands, so on and so forth. Blackmore's Rainbow, John Lord had his solo records. Ian Gillan had his own band, Gillan, which was actually really kind of interesting. Roger Glover did Elements, which is kind of a minor progressive rock classic. I just recently rediscovered this record. It's super cheap. You might be able to see what I paid for it. Again, Simon Phillips on drums, really lights it up on this. Ronnie Asbury from Backdoor on saxophones. I got to talk about Backdoor someday. What a great band that was. And there's an electric violinist named Grant Prescott, Mickey Lee Soul on piano and organ. This is not all instrumental, but it's not what you'd expect from Deep Purple sideman band member. Roger Glover on bass and keyboards. It's pretty adventurous and very long tracks, and I think a really underrated record. Finishing up here, I talked about Passport repeatedly in the Kurt Kress clan. Kurt Kress was also in a band with the guitar player from Nectar, believe it or not, and they were called Snowball. On their first record, it's Kurt Kress on drums, Roy Albrighton on guitar and vocals, Dave King on bass and synth, and Christian Schultz, also from Passport, on keyboards. This is a great record. I played the heck out of this when I was in high school. And it's still a cheapie. And 1978, actually I was in college. But that said, this is a really cool record, really fantastic, great tunes. Even the vocal tunes are pretty cool. Their second record was much more commercial, unfortunately, but this has withstood the test of time, and it's got some really excellent kind of Passport sounding instrumentals on it. And the guy from Nectar, who'd have thunk it, just doesn't make any sense. Finally, I'm going to wrap up. This is a group called Madura, and I always think this record's missing something. There's no credits on it. I got this in a swap with a friend from Sweden, so this is a Swedish pressing. There's no credits, no nothing. This is their second album, Madura 2, and the keyboard player went on to be in Rufus. Slightly later, they did 2 records, and they're not necessarily progressive rock. They're more like quirky rock, and then they would do these like really cool instrumental tracks. Anyway, if you've got a couple of bucks and you see this, check it out. There's some pretty run-of-the-mill rock on it. But then they do Dr. Honorius Causa, which is an early Weather Report track, and they just kill it. And it's just a really kind of an interesting record, Madura 2. Anyway, that's all I've got for you on this edition of Cheap Heat. I hope you liked it. I hope you listened to the whole thing. I know it's a long slog, but I think rewarding in the end. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Anyway, take care, and thanks again for watching, listening, and checking it all out. Now go out and buy some records.